Securing the modern enterprise requires insights into massive amounts of data. NVIDIA Morpheus harnesses the power of AI and GPU computing to help protect networks in a way never before possible, enabling 100% data visibility to provide cybersecurity analysts the tools to identify, capture, and act on threats and anomalies. Sign up for a free 1-hour NVIDIA Deep Learning Institute course. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/NVIDIA. Businesses need API protection that goes beyond signature matching and can stay ahead of attackers and their various tactics and tools. They need a solution that is more patient and prepared than a modern attacker and can track their actions over time. ThreatX is the only API attack protection platform that delivers on the promise of stopping API attacks in real time while giving you the visibility you need to prepare for future attacks. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatX. Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever. And with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security with Invicti, the application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API. With unparalleled accuracy, coverage, and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. Discover why many of the world's largest organizations innovate securely with Invicti. Visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Kongyu Chan from Qualys about getting towards a standard of metadata for container images and managing distroless images. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Plus, do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions at securityweekly.com/guests. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. We also have a way of building up t-shirt slogans. I know that you've been tracking them, John. I think that's far more important. And those slogans come from all sorts of news articles that we start to talk about. I think one real quick that we might just get out of the way early on is the Text4Shell that was, it's, another, it has Java, it has curly braces, it can be an RCE, and it can also maybe just fizzle and not be as worrisome as the other 4Shell that I'm not going to name. So I don't know if there's anything really to add for that, since Kong helpfully added some more context around it. But here's your chance to make fun of Java if you want.
I'm looking over my t-shirt slogans, seeing which one fits best. It's complicated. It's not complicated. That's what's really sort of interesting about this one is, it's not that big a deal. I mean, my snark can say, hey, why are they releasing this so soon? We're still making money off Log4j. So, but this isn't, it's interesting to me that, here's my takeaway in this way. It's interesting that it's not more prevalent, because what Commons Text does from Apache is, it's a collection of libraries for doing text parsing, and these are the types of things you sort of want to do to make sure, and including escaping, which is some of the things you want to do to minimize your chances of compromise in other ways. So the fact that people are not using this library, while it's good that we're not going to have many people getting exploited off this, we're not seeing the exploit in the wild yet. At the same time, I'm like, we should be using a little more of this. So I don't know, that's the good and the bad there.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I think, to me, it kind of speaks to that idea of attack surface possibly as a theme we might develop this episode, just in the sense of, why is there code out there that no one's using it? Should they be, for that matter? Or if no one's using it, maybe we should just delete the code, or just so that it's not, so it's not present. Because, and I'm saying that generally just because some of the best, application secure coding you can do is deleting code rather than putting it through a validator or something else, OWASP top 10 list, ASV list, what have you. So that will be my way of finding something more interesting than that yet another 9.8 CVSS, go fix your CVEs. So let's see. Well, let's talk a little bit more maybe about exploitation of Angle. I found one, a write-up about a $10,000 bounty, not too bad. That's basically boils down to HTML injection or a cross-site scripting of a sort. that normally my eyes glaze over at such things because cross-site scripting has been around forever, will be around forever. Yawn. But this was pretty clever, taking advantage of a MathJax library, basically a JavaScript library for rendering math, which I think both of us enjoy math. So that was another reason that it spoke to me. But once again, it's a fun walkthrough because it's a good attacker-minded thinking, where the researcher said, I tried this payload and then it was a duplicate. GitHub already knew about it. So I went through and poked around this particular library to see what does the syntax look like? Let me become an expert on basically how this library, renders different mathematical formulas. Got another vulnerability, got another payload out of it, but it just mucked around with some normal or non-sensitive HTML tags. And then through persistence and patience, the researcher found a way to get a script tag in there. So I thought it was a really good way of just learning. Learning about that attacker-minded thinking. That's my phrase to go for. So a good way of just read through, see how other people think about cross-site scripting, or just become basically experts on a library, experts on a protocol that we've seen with Portswigger and what he's done with HTTP request smuggling. So that's my underlying message there. And hopefully you've got something else, underline or overline, or should we just bury that one and move on?
I'll go overline. No, I think this article is short and it's a jumping point, at least for me, in thoughts. And I think, I'm with you. I like a lot of this stuff which we cover on the show here, and God, I'm probably repeating myself, but sorry, is where we look at these things to sort of figure out what's a different viewpoint, right? I think a way you could almost say security is sort of an extension of I'll forget the phrase, but the ability to sort of empathize with someone else. How are they looking at? Are they thinking about using this thing in a way different than you? It's how do you get yourself out of your brain as a developer or a security person and think about the other side. But as you're talking through what this guy's reminding me of, or what this article is reminding me of, there's a thought that's been in my head for the last few weeks. A quote, I can't remember where I picked it up from. I didn't make it in my notes, but the idea that snark, which, a lot of us sort of look down at like, oh my God, someone's being snarky about it. It's a fairly internal sort of a nerdy joke. But to be successful with snark, you have to be sort of an expert in the material you're talking about to make fun of it. And I think something similar goes like that for this here, right? It's you can't just, he found something quickly and lightly, thought he was cool. No, people got that. If you want to do something that's worthwhile, you have to actually go deeper. I'm trying to not use certain phrases here, sorry, but you're trying to actually have to go and experience and thinking of MathJax reminds me of back when I worked many years ago at the math department at UC Davis. We were thinking about how do you display functions on a web page, and like at that point I wasn't even nearly good enough to think about writing MathJax. But that was like, we're like, oh, we'd love to have this thing. But from that period of time, when I was bored late at nighttime, single nerd, I'd be like reading the man page for Bash. And that's how I learned Bash really well, right? And it's that same sort of thing. It's like, as you dig into these things, that's how you both improve your own skill set, but also understand the security weaknesses in them. So small article, but it's got a lot of words out of me.
No, that's great. So you mentioned university, you've mentioned math. Let's take a detour into a fun article then. John, you mentioned you went to college, so you're an expert on quantum computing. You must be. Tell us about this article. Yes.
I went to college and I dropped out of college, but I was pondering getting a minor in physics. So actually in quantum physics. So I didn't go too far down that path, but this article caught my attention from Gizmodo. Physicists got a quantum computer to work by blasting with the Fibonacci sequence. So the reason I brought this up here, what they're doing in a way, at a high level, what quantum computers are doing is you're computing on qubits, right, which have neither a 0 or 1. We've probably talked about them on this show. You can have a 0 and a 1. And that's how you get sort of multiprocessing out of them in a way. The build. I'm being loose in my phrases here. Send the hate mail to, we're on Discord. But the problem with quantum computing is you have to have what's called entanglement between one or more of those qubits. That's how you sort of see what's going on. But as soon as you start examining them to see the result of the computation, the chance of that entanglement going away increases dramatically. So what some researchers figured out is if they keep bombarding it, not just with random noise, but like specifically with part of the Fibonacci sequence, the entanglement actually stays in place longer. So something about that, the pattern of the numbers of how those are changing, that it's able to create, I guess, enough entropy on the entanglement to keep it in place. Where we dove deep quickly here. Hopefully that is accurate and entertaining to people. But the interesting part about this here, to me, why I brought it up in ASW, is you're sort of DOSing the thing. So it's a way of using a denial of service attack for good to keep entanglement between those things and actually allow, because the longer you can keep that entanglement in place, the cheaper the cost of the quantum computer, because you don't have to go back and recreate the entanglement, which is part of the expensive part. So long way to say DOS isn't always bad. I don't know, not something I would have expected to say, but here we are.
You definitely surprised me on the direction you took that one. I thought this was going to be, Fibonacci sequence. It's a classic interview question about recursive functions. And so this is going to go onto your list of interview questions, but I like the DOS. And I guess my final comment there too is, yes, fun discovering a new state of matter through Fibonacci sequences. But for all of you out there worried about quantum computing and quantum safe encryption, just get your systems on TLS 1.2 and TLS 1.3 first, and let's tackle those problems first.
No problem.
No problem. All right. Let's say, speaking of no problems, actually, let's speak about problems. There was you could break, speaking of encryption gone bad, you could break signature on malware and exploit Windows. This is another one of your articles, John.
Yes. Yeah, you got a lot of stuff this week, and I think you got a few that I wanted to cover, but we'll dig into those. So this one came out, I believe, this morning. So it's 24th. Came out over the weekend. Oh boy. So I don't know if Linux does this. Maybe you know, but modern OSs, by which for right at this moment I'll mean Mac and Windows. Nothing against Linux. I just haven't run it as a desktop, so I'm not sure. But the other two, and people on the other fringe OSs, don't let me. I'm not trying to throw shade at you, but for these two particular operating systems, modern operating systems, let's try it that way. They both have the ability to mark a flag on a file saying this was downloaded from the internet. Intention here is, so you download something from the internet, you run it, good chance that's where a lot of our malware comes from, right? So you download something from the internet in IE or Firefox or Chrome, it toggles a little bit saying, hey, this came from somewhere else. Then you go to run it. At least on Mac OS, it will, I think by default, deny it. And on Windows, it will, Windows 11, Windows 10, it will pop up a message saying, hey, do you really want to do this? And part of how this works is there's something, I had the phrase in here, sort of a fun little phrase, mark of the web, they call this, at least on the Windows world. And what happens when you go to run this is the Windows, I'm not going to find it quick enough, it's not in my notes, but their security widget, the technical phrase there, is going to look and see if the file is signed. And it turns out some malware, it looks like the malware authors figured this out first, then the malware researchers realized what the authors were doing, something called Magniver. But what they were doing is they figured out if they sign in this example, a JavaScript file, because this isn't necessarily just binaries. So if you sign a JavaScript file, it works for binaries too. Sign a JavaScript file and then break the signature. When Windows goes to validate the signature on that file and sees that it's not a valid signature, instead of showing an error message or instead of showing, hey, this was downloaded from the internet, it just runs it. So, beside the fact it's I think on the Kinsella scale, that's pretty bad. The reason I brought it up here is just, it's sort of a QA thing, right? Like, how do we, as I was just talking about, how do we think about, getting outside our head and thinking about other people, either from a developer or security point of view? That same thing comes down, in fact, for QA. And I understand Windows is a huge system and how do you QA all of it? I also understand how many employees Microsoft has. But that's sort of the case here, right? Is how do you go about testing these edge cases to figure out something like this before the bad guy? And they've got screenshots in here of what's going on, and it shows in both examples, hey, this file came from a computer, from another computer. So if they both recognize that it was, if you look in Windows and either properties or on the file system, both show that this came from another place. So they both still have the mark of the web. The operating system recognizes that, but it doesn't actually, it gets confused by itself when it goes to check the certificate, and we end up compromising a system in this case. So, yeah,
and it's a wonderful point about that aspect of the unit testing, functional testing? Like, how does something as what seems so dead simple, dead obvious in retrospect, of course, get through a testing? And I was trying to pull up an example within the last 1 or 2 weeks. I think we had Apple also had a signing failure too, that it would accept any signature. So I'll have to pull out those details. But clearly, this is not unique to Microsoft.
And to talk about that for a second, that's, I don't know if Microsoft is probably at least hitting my radar a little more frequently, but in general, I think their stumbles are showing up in the media. And Apple has this, I guess I would say it's a bit of a PR trick, where they release a bunch of patches and then they release a bunch of CVEs. And for me to make that useful, I have to go and track down what each CVE is. So it seems like unless it's like an actual significant issue, they've managed to just provide enough information that it flies underneath the radar. So I saw the CVEs for the last update, but I missed that one. So interesting.
Yeah, and we'll have to make some. I'm making some mental notes out here, out loud, listeners. There'd be an aspect of just talking about patch notes and a culture around a Patch Tuesday, or how much do we care about CVEs, or rather than saying how much do we care, I think the better question is who cares about the CVEs, because that touches on the developers, the AppSec folks, researchers, security researchers, etc. Real teasing a future topic there.
It feels like CVEs have gotten sort of a bad rap in the last year or so. That and CVSS, and I think they're both super useful. Maybe they're more useful and more interesting to me than they are to, I don't know, an average Windows user. And I get that, but like it feels like as our own community, we're sort of ripping on them a little. I don't know. That's my impression, and it seems a little weird.
It does. And I think for me, you mentioned this a couple episodes ago too, is the idea that it can be, if we're going to snark on something, which is always fun, or if we're going to rip on something, sure, that can be entertaining, but what else do you use? So it's really easy just to say, that's crap, don't use it. But then if it's crickets, when somebody responds, thanks for pointing that out, what should we do better?
Yeah.
Silence isn't very helpful at that point. Some other things that aren't helpful this is the segue. Some other things that aren't helpful are reference implementations that have subtle buffer overflows in them, memory unsafety. And here is not necessarily a sky is falling type of vulnerability, but it got a CVE with it, I believe. Reference code for SHA-3 implementation, or the extended KEJAK code package, if I've pronounced it, or KEJAK. I'll throw both the pronunciations in there because that way one of them might be right. But the idea here is that, similar to the theme of copy pasting from Stack Overflow, and you copy paste a vulnerability, if you're doing so from crypto, because as AppSec folks say, you don't roll your own crypto, one of those easy mantras that takes a little bit more detail to dive into. This is just an example of somebody, perhaps better reference here, somebody going back and reading the protocol, reading about an algorithm, reading the specifics, and understanding what does SHA-3 look like. And then as they were doing that education, like our other discussion around MathJax, discovered a buffer overflow, just a minor coded vulnerability within the implementation in the unsafe C language, as the writer reports. So it's a short article. I probably talked longer than it would take to read through the article. But for me, it was just more of one of those examples of be careful with our reference code. And, human eyes aren't the best of doing code review, since apparently this took over a decade for somebody to at least write about it and find this vuln. So maybe there's interesting there, maybe not. What do we think? What's our Kinsella scale for this one?
The Kinsella scale is meh. Yeah. But, kudos to them for tracking that down. I'm looking at it, I'm still going like, I don't quite understand. But, homework for our listeners. If anyone out there is bored and wants to build a website that, it's like Stack Overflow, but any example that you copy off it is known to be vulnerable, that could be sort of fun. We might give that a little attention. So, if someone needs a little bit of a holiday project, there you go.
Oh, I love this. Okay, we've got, I've been choosing the articles, and there's a couple that I see might work together, but what's the one that you want to talk about next, John?
I don't know. Let's see. I haven't arranged mine yet. Let's go talk about this one, the TSA and the Railroad Cybersecurity Directive. This was, I know this is yours, but it actually sort of was interesting to me too, from the point of view that this is one of the systems that, security around railroads is sort of important. You've got these, 20 car being conservative trains, which weigh massive amounts. The amount of inertia behind these things once you get going is, we've all seen what they do to cars, either in real life or on the movies. So the technology behind them has been both not standardized and quite weak over time. So I'm quite happy to see this coming here. One of the problems we've had up here in Alaska, I'm not moving. In the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, there was an accident here a few years ago where a modern signaling system wasn't in place on the tracks. So the train didn't know the appropriate speed it was supposed to be going around the corner, like not a tight corner, right? But still, it was going too fast and it derailed. So I know they're improving that type of thing, but tell me a little more in detail about what's going on here from the security side of things.
Yeah, for me, I like this in the sense that the TSA really is just saying, hey, give us a point of contact, which for, to report incidents or for a contact for SLSA. So that's actually, we'll have to find out what label they want to use, because Kong would appreciate that. Is a good callback to that segment. They're also saying, make sure you have an incident response plan, because your critical infrastructure, we're labeling you as such, to use another word of the episode, and talking about security and integrity of your backed up data, which really just means don't get hit by ransomware. But I think more importantly, make sure you can actually restore the data that you back up and do some vuln assessments. So there's nothing necessarily earth shattering here, but I wanted to pull it out just because it's one of those cautions to make sure we don't always just talk about the latest social media exploit or this other type of JavaScript front end. Application security, quite importantly, covers applications, which is the easy tautology and is kind of meaningless when I put it that way. But it also means there's industries beyond just something you could put together with JavaScript. You pointed out the quite physical connections here and consequences of, these aren't, self-driving trains quite yet, or they're not running on JavaScript stacks. At least I hope not, as I say that out loud. But there still is obviously important data here that the trains use, or coordinating, just not even necessarily to derail a train, but to get logistics. And so if you attack logistics, there's a lot of economic fallout that could come from there. So these are the types of things, just expand our view and remember that there are other industries out there that could be just fun threat models to learn from. And maybe there's some metaphors or there's some threat models we can take for ourselves as well.
Yep, spot on. It's funny, what I was going to say was, either when I go talk to customers or when I'm out at conferences and just bump into someone in the not cafeteria, but like the lunchroom and go like, hey, who are you? Where are you from? That type of thing. You find out about people, aspects of what might at first sound like, I think one comes to mind was like an auto supply shop. And you're like, okay, what do you care about security, or why are you thinking about containers, whatever it was at the time? And like, you suddenly realize what you think of as like a place where you go to get like muffler parts has like this fairly massive amount of both infrastructure as well as security needs around it. So it's interesting to sort of think, as you said, outside our head, and what do other people need to consume in the security world? I'll go in a different direction. You found this article on TonerDef, printing your next persistence, NCC story. Want to talk about that one?
We do, especially because I had an alternate name for it. But I know you like your hardware, you like the firmware. So hopefully there was something here that really stood out for you.
Yeah, I mean, even just, it looks like a good talk. I haven't tracked down the recorded version of it yet, but being able to, they start off the talk by saying, hey, we wanted to work on a capture the flag, right? Or was it, no, it was it was basically a capture the flag. Anyway, it was a security contest, a pwn to own, same idea. So he knew nothing about printer security. He goes and buys a Lexmark printer and goes, well, let's see what we can find out, which is either a bit of a humble brag, or you got lucky that you're able to actually dig in and do that. So he takes the thing apart. He's like ripping out to the motherboard, talks through finding the UART, getting the flash off it, the firmware off the flash, pulling out the binaries, and then starting to dig through it. It looks like he managed to mount it as a loopback file system. And it's sort of funny to see, like, these aren't easy things to do, right? I'm at the level where I can do this stuff, but it's not simple for me. And I'm sure he's doing it more often, so it's a little more easy. But going and buying a printer, ripping the thing apart, and something having like a file system you can go and browse and find things on, pretty good tricks, and that's why it is entertaining to me. But he manages to find some return on remote object bus issues and digs through it. And it's just sort of fun, like actually look at him going through this and digging into it. And he found Hydra on it. Yeah. But I'm partially talking as I flip through it, partially sort of, it's 60 slides, but it's a quick 60 slides. So I think it's a good read.
It's a fun read, and it fits in. I always love to see some of the themes that might emerge from the articles we cover, because become an expert in MathJax to figure out how to get an HTML injection from it, or drop a little bit of money on those, a big ol' Lexmark printer, become an expert on a printer, and exercise those skills of firmware analysis, pulling it apart. You mentioned like a couple different tools. It's not necessarily easy to do, so this is also a great way to learn. And I think, rather than just, doing capture the flags on their own, go out and find a protocol, a library, or a tech stack and become an expert on it. And that expertise lets you become both snarky as well as possibly lead you into a conference presentation or a $10,000 bug bounty. And the only thing I wanted to add here is that they called it toner def, which is okay, pretty decent, but it's a Lexmark printer, and I wish they had called it Lexmark of the Beast, because that speaks to my Halloween heart.
Cute.
Indeed cute. But what else is cute, but starting to get a little cringe, a little too cute? We've got a pair of articles. You've got one, I've got another one on the whole supply chain environment here. Yeah. Google is rolling out, I'm going to have to let out a big sigh as I say it, they're announcing GUAC to pair with SLSA, and just like SLSA is a acronym, so is GUAC. But the spirit of it, the G in GUAC is for graph, as in graph-based analysis of the information within SBOMs, which is essentially saying, okay, we threw all these SBOMs together. I want to ask some questions of it. A vuln comes out. Do I care? Am I affected? Those are probably two decent questions. And what GUAC is intended to do is pretty much say, oh, you have all these SBOMs, they're tied together, dependencies of dependencies. And it can say, you know what, you are not affected, which is actually great news, or you are affected, but probably, through these particular areas, and this might inform your prioritization. So that is my take on it. I'm not sure if there's something else around GUAC you appreciated, or perhaps a different view of SBOMs, Mr. Kinsella.
They need a theme song. They can call it GUAC This Way.
Speaking to my heart.
Thank you. No, I'm still scrolling through this, but what actually did catch my interest excitedly, and I want to go play with, is they link to something called Sift from the folks at Anchor, an open source package. It's out on GitHub. Links in the article. SYFT for those who need to Google. But looks like this is able to generate an SBOM from a container image. So it'll mount the container image, get a list of packages in there, and then spit it out in a few different formats. So that sounds interesting. They cover Alpine, Red Hat, Debian, C++, Dart, Java, JavaScript. So they've got a pretty good mixture of stuff that they've sort of stuck together, Rust and Swift as well. Swift in a container. Interesting. But anyways, so I think that's where my next half hour after this call is going to be, is just playing with that and going, hey, this might be a way to actually get some of this data in an easy form. And I'll pivot over to, I think overall what Google is doing here sounds interesting. I, in general, am not a massive fan of graph databases. I think in many ways they are used by people who see them and think, oh, that's going to solve all my problems. With the Graph API, I don't have to write APIs for all my developers. On the consumer side, I can just give them the Graph API and get they query whatever they want, which is a horrible idea. Just in case anyone is wondering, for most cases. But the graph database itself tends to really frequently be useful in security world. This here, off the top of my head, Jupyter 1. I think it is, has a open source package that combines a graph database with a bunch of data and allows you to pretty easily sort of go and throw stuff together and get a sense of what these things can do. I hope I'm mentioning the right company. I think I am. But I think from that point of view, this is interesting because the SBOM by itself is okay, cool. As we've heard me gripe about too many times, generating the SBOM is not the easiest thing. But I think from an analysis point of view, this sounds interesting to me. So I would love to get a chance to play with it. So we'll see if I can. But I will pivot over to my article, which I threw in really after I saw your article, because I think I had an article on this a week or two ago of similar similar breadth or concept. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But from dark reading, someone else, probably another vendor, is saying that SBOMs are an overhyped concept that won't secure your software supply chain. And they go through a few, points. Everything is optional, therefore nothing's required. SBOM missed the mark on provenance. One of his comments is that but it's the standard scan article that you're only scanning the SBOM you only know the state of the SBOM at the time of the scan. It's okay, there's some vendor out there starting to do real time or continuous SBOM generation, and I'm just gonna don't go there, please. But so. I like some of his points are valid, but at the same time, it's I don't know. We keep generating more noise on both sides, and I think we're generating almost more noise about SBOMs than we are SBOMs. So I don't know. Hopefully things get better.
Don't go there, please. Might have to be another new Kinsella slogan for, or at least maybe on your scale. But I think one of the things that I'll try to throw in the article from OpenSSF that I threw in about OSF security scorecard, maybe that ties into what you were saying, because I think one of the complaints, is that SBOMs aren't designed to solve supply chain on their own. There are behaviors, there are multiple tools. And if you look at the graph that's talking about the security scorecard, I think that helps convey the idea that there are many things that have to come together, including an SBOM, to address security, because you want to make sure you're addressing the threats appropriately, or what is a tool or process designed, what threat is it designed to protect from? And SBOMs are not designed to protect us from all things and everything in the supply chain. And what was interesting about this article is that I just like the graph, is that code review was really high on the elements most useful for identifying vulnerable projects. But they also had branch protection was in there, pin dependencies, and also just the binaries themselves. So it's interesting just to see that branch protection, inspecting binaries and pinning dependencies, those are three, I think, relatively easily automatable type of practices. But code review, definitely not automated. You can enforce that code review has to happen, but that doesn't necessarily have a transitive dependency to play around with our math language on the quality of that code review. So just thought it was interesting. It does link into the state of supply chain security, which I didn't actually, to be honest, read in detail, but it wasn't behind a registration wall. So thank you, vendors, for that. So I'm not sure if there's anything else that you want to hit there, but because I'm saving time for one more article. I'm
done with this one. Where do you want to go next?
So there's the OWASP is having some board elections, and people are voting on it. And I came across this because Mark Curphey, apologies, is a founder of OWASP back over 2 decades ago, and he has a manifesto that he posted online about what he would do as part of the board. And now, honestly, I don't know all of the people running for the board. So here are my qualifications on this is not an endorsement. But I didn't enjoy reading about a lot of what his thoughts are, which real quickly, changing the funding model to make it more corporate funded rather than just rely on individuals as major sources of funding. And another thing that stood out to me was redesigning OWASP.org and implementing more of a product management. And I think listeners may know over time that I've not been a fan of the OWASP Top 10. I like the work, appreciate the work, and it's a wonderful awareness, but it's awareness. And the latest iteration also says, if you're trying to build a security program off the OWASP Top 10, don't. But if you're really trying because you're not listening to us, here's some ways that you could start a security program based on the OWASP Top 10. But, and my rant will almost be over in a second, just as we were mentioning TSA and trains, there's a lot more to application security than just saying, here's a cross-site scripting or input validation, those types of issues. So I like the idea of revisiting OWASP, thinking about what hasn't been working in the past. Why do we still have vulnerable software? But better than that, rather than just asking the question, here maybe are some ways of getting there. So that's what I was thinking of when I was reading through this manifesto. Help me out, John, with your own thoughts on this.
I felt like this is words are failing me, but I got the impression reading through this that this could be a moment of change for OWASP. He's highlighting a bunch of things to me. You can read the whole thing, but even just going through his bullets at the top, where are they here? Update the brand and change and clarify the mission, funding model. I mean, you hit these. OWASP investment funds, deeply technical talent, community values, and the redesign. Those are what 7, 2, 4, 6. Bullets, which by themselves sort of sound, probably like you'd hear in a lot of campaigns. But hearing that and sort of the weight he's putting behind it and who's saying this for OWASP, to me was I was sort of like, okay, that if he gets support and starts working on this, could be I think quite incredible. It makes me want to go back and watch that keynote that he mentioned at the beginning from, I think it was this year's, the 20th anniversary. So I'm going to have to go back and give that a listen, because I think it's when I see something like this from someone like this, it feels like a sort of a potential for sea change, which I think is really interesting. And like one of the points that stuck in my head from reading this is like, the most common thing we have most common tool we have in security today in AppSec is a SAST, static analyzer, and there's no decent SAST project going on at OWASP right now, which is there's some heavy statements in here. So I think it has the feel of hope and change for take with that good or bad, depending on your viewpoints in American politics. And then the last thing, which was really interesting to me, is he built this on HubSpot. And I don't know if he did that just purely out of ease, but to me, so those who don't know, HubSpot is a marketing platform for small to medium enterprises. Does a lot of tracking. So using that, probably a free version of it, it probably was a simple way to get a website up. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, is he actually really putting like metrics behind this and watching who's reading and where they're coming from or what's going on? It could be interesting to, that could just purely be coincidence, but it caught my eye.
No, that's I use GitHub Pages. That's a wonderful way of setting up a static markdown website for a blog. And I think as you're talking, I agree. We'd love to see a type of sea change coming from OWASP, because we just talked about that OpenSSF article, and we've been talking about the Open Source Security Foundation for at least every month, I think, this entire year. Partially because they have some concrete projects, concrete investments that they're demonstrating. Let's apply. They're not creating a SaaS tool, as you mentioned. I agree that would be great, but they're applying SaaS. They're applying security testing. They're also applying security engineering, basically fixing vulnerabilities to areas. And I think those are that's how to help developers. That's how to improve application security. So hopefully OWASP sees that. Will not necessarily, maybe not imitate it directly, but will figure out how to iterate on that type of model. I think partially that too is going to come from the more corporate investing, so you can get some deep pockets, because as John, I think as you know, podcasting does not create deep pockets, but it does create deep technical attention. So I'm going to throw in the one final article here. Last episode, I threw in a deep dive on Linux kernel hacking. If you want to become an expert on it, I probably don't have the brain space left to become a Linux kernel hacker, but I love the web. And here's another deep dive article on Chrome browser exploitation, which I throw out there. I think it's going to take us more than a minute to talk about if we want to do it justice, but it's a great resource for those of you that want to become an expert on an area and learn about security. And one of the ways to do that is just figure out how are these things put together. And so here's how a Chrome browser is put together and then taken apart.
It looks cool, but I won't lie, I haven't had time to read all this. And I think I'll stay on the kernel hacking side, and I'll let you stay on the JavaScript hacking side.
No, that seems fair, because yes, that's the secret. Also why I saved this article for last, because look at that, we're out of time, and because I didn't read through it either in detail, we can't talk about it anymore. But more secrets of podcasting. But I think maybe the other, not a secret of podcasting. Let's just give you the final word, John. Take us out here. What's the message? Yeah, party message.
Man, secure all your container images. Let's see. make sure your SBOMs are something you can easily generate, help make OWASP a better place, and hope everyone's alive and healthy. How about that?
Sounds pretty wonderful. Not snarky at all, and actually, quite genuine. Thank you, John. Thank you, all of our listeners. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes, and we'll see you next week, which will be Halloween. This will be a great day on Application Security Weekly.